I am still trying to present my screen, which seems to be starting to work. Join now, yes. Okay, bada boom. And we're good. So here we're talking about partners. I am going to lead this very much kind of like the first breakout session that Josh did such a great job on, where we are going to be kind of just opening it up to the room. I wanted to very briefly start off by just sharing a little bit of the history about how we've been engaging with partners. I described this a little bit, I think, on the first or second day, but it's relatively informal. We have a BD team that we do interface with. A lot of times there's existing relationships with other parts of Google that we leverage, but it can be kind of informal, and there's no real like structure project or some like cabal of companies and connections between them or anything like that. In terms of goals, I think there are 3 high-level categories that we usually try and achieve when we're trying to drive partner adoption. Obviously, partners are important to experiencing the web, and we want them to have the best possible experience, and so we want them to be adopting these things just so that their site becomes better. We also want to make sure that when partners have needs that aren't being fulfilled, that we can adequately capture that and understand those needs. And then lastly, partners are incredibly important to validating that we're not only designing the right thing, but also to show the adoption of these APIs so that hopefully other browsers will someday adopt them and they can be fully standardized. So with those goals in mind, I want to hand off this microphone and start asking this room for either provocative questions or about ideas for how we can better scale and get partner attention and eyeballs on these different things. We also have Pete here, who is our DevRel. He leads the like one-to-many level of communication, and there could be some ideas that can come from the room about ways that we can collect partner feedback that way.
Hey, the web is about long tail. We know there's a couple of big guys and then this long tail. So do you have a strategy to approach this kind of long tail of partners, smaller guys? I know that you're talking to big brands, and I think that's a great start. You need to start somewhere. That was basically mine.
Great provocative question.
Yeah, that was mine.
Yes.
So I think that's one of the things we try and do within DevRel. And sometimes we succeed at it really well, and sometimes we fail at it pretty miserably. Getting out to the long tail partners. Getting the head is important because, like, if we don't have a head, nobody's going to be like, "Oh, wow, look, that cool company's doing it," right? It helps us drive that. We try and get out and get the many.
Another problem we've had is that. Another problem we've had is that sometimes smaller companies aren't as well funded to experiment with things that aren't yet stable or landed. Like a lot of the time they'll outsource to a vendor, and so then they're literally paying like by the hour for any sort of development. And so it can go both ways, where sometimes it's really cool because they may be like, if you find the right person who's passionate about it, it's really awesome. But sometimes it's harder because they're paying by the hour for like contract work to get their site up or something like that.
Yeah, I think echoing something that Tom mentioned on a thread about this, I think a lot of times the most effective partnerships are where you make a personal connection with an individual on a specific team rather than trying to like actually connect with some nebulous organization. And thank you, Daniel, for taking notes. So maybe to pose out a bit of a problem that I've personally run into when doing a lot of this partner communication. I think a lot of times we'll have an API, things like idle detection or web NFC or things like that, which we know adds real value to the website experience, but where we haven't found a partner yet, and kind of the like ideating of like, well, this partner might be interested, or like I use this application and I wish it had this feature. But then actually going from that idea of this partner might find this beneficial to then actually communicating that to them can usually be very hard. I know that for some of these partners like Twitch and many others, like Google at a Google level talks to them when sometimes we have to actually prioritize our requests for them, which is sometimes a question of like, how can we help you? But that gets prioritized against other requests from other parts of Google. And since we're just asking for like their input, sometimes that's deprioritized compared to other things. I'm kind of curious to hear from Microsoft how you kind of approach this and whether or not Microsoft also suffers from like an over communication to partners.
I can talk about that a little bit. Actually, from almost I guess from the experience of Edge HTML. So the thing that I always talked about when we were sort of trying to figure out how to move from MS HTML into Edge HTML, one of the things that we would talk about is the tail of the web, and just talking about how do we communicate with the tail of the web, because when you produce a new engine, which Edge HTML was really a fork and then a whole bunch of deletes, but it still was a new engine that we had to test and had to be very careful about. All of the big players cared deeply that they worked well on Edge HTML. So if there was a bug on YouTube, they would fix it. If there was a bug on Yahoo, they would fix it. But if the website that I used to make an appointment to get my haircut didn't work, they had no idea why. Like they didn't know how to debug it. They didn't have an on-site HTML developer who could check that they were using proprietary APIs that only worked in IE or whatever. And reaching the tail became, I would say, effectively 5 years of chasing and chasing and chasing and not making very effective progress. And we ended up having to basically surrender that engine because we couldn't impact the tail. So I think we've had sort of we'd be sort of a bad example for reaching the tail of the web, because it turns out that the head of the web really takes care of itself. And what we've learned from that is that we need to figure out, and we are working on ways to more effectively, I guess, leverage people who are members of the community who aren't necessarily looking to be consultants, aren't necessarily looking to get paid to help debug, but are looking to make names for themselves, are looking to get recognized and get paid through intrinsic value rather than extrinsic, and having them help reach out to these different sites. So like, I get my haircut at Rudy's, and so, well, I'm a sort of a bad example because I work at Microsoft, but when their website doesn't work, I went in and told them, I was like, oh, hey, it looks like you're using this API. You have this little weird piece of code that says, if Edge do this thing and that doesn't work anymore, you should fix that. And we've had some level of success by leveraging the community rather than trying to go out ourselves. We still do go out to all these big places, and we go out to some of the tail, but I think it's a problem that we certainly haven't solved, but that we are working toward, and we've learned a lot from pretty bad mistakes of the past.
Want to keep opening it up to the room? Any other questions or ideas? Yeah.
So I've spent a lot of time out there at the tail. I've been most of my life at startups that I would never consider asking Google to do anything. And for me, like places like Stack Overflow were crucial. Like if there wasn't a bunch of posts about a technology on Stack Overflow, I didn't really trust it because I didn't know if I was going to be able to find answers to questions. And I think a lot of the big partners might communicate with us more directly, and then that doesn't show up on a place like Stack Overflow. So we can make those communications more public and in a place where, long tail developers would look and see them. That could help bolster confidence and get them to, adopt these things.
It's a great point. Pete.
What worries me a little bit is, so I entirely agree with everything that has been said, but I think maybe we can divide things in terms of development from kind of like, launch to activation, right? Now, these are all challenges to kind of like activate a long tail of an ecosystem, but I don't think that for a lot of the APIs that we're working on, the problem is how do you activate a long tail? I think in many ways, it's sometimes constructive to like work in a small group with few partners that are extremely engaged, are extremely efficient. They know a lot about the problem space. They know about their users, and so it's very interesting to hear about your experience having challenges activating the long tail after you get an API launched. But for a lot of the APIs that we're working on, I fear that If the problem that we're trying to solve is like, how do we scale partnership? I feel like this is the wrong problem to solve. It's actually, I would actually solve the problem. How do you unscale? How do you like? It's more of a BD GTech kind of relationship where it's a one-to-one hand holding where you're working very closely, rather than a, let's talk on Twitter how to design this API.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I definitely think of this stuff in terms of stages, and kind of like you have the first stage where you want to find a partner that's motivating enough that you want to like invest and do this API. Then you want to find a partner who's like big and can state their public support so that you can get it through standards and drive cross-browser adoption. And then once you kind of release it, that's when you really want to like pursue that long tail. At the same time, I feel like we do have a gap of collecting kind of broad scale feedback. I think we're listening pretty well to big partners, but I also don't want to forget, everyone else who isn't a big partner, and somehow trying to capture their feedback.
I think the other thing that came up when this was brought up like 2 days ago or whatever and got added to the breakout was not just how do we collect all the right data, but how do we share it? And I think you maybe even brought it up as like, how do I, as a developer who's like working on this API, go quickly understand what all the partners wanted? And especially for places where our partners aren't NDA'd, certainly also across our boundaries. So I don't know. I don't really have any good ideas, but I just wanted to at least, that was, I think, the original point of the scalability part, more so than how to scale input. It was how to scale the after.
Cross-company collaboration. I think a great start would actually being able to share with each other what partners we're working with.
Yeah, at least figuring out who's not NDA'd. So that we can.
So one question for the Microsoft folks. How do you decide which partners you're going to go reach out to and talking to stuff? Do you have a list? And whatever you're comfortable talking about?
Yeah, I can share a little bit of what I know. I don't know if you know more, but there's teams within Microsoft that run DevRel similar to what you guys do. And we have DevRel inside Edge, and we also have App DevRel. And so for App DevRel, more and more as we've looked into web apps, sometimes our App DevRel team will reach out and be like, hey, this app company is trying to add a web view or is like looking at web capabilities. On the flip side, inside Edge, we have a DevRel team that runs like Edge Dev Twitter and blog posts and that kind of stuff. And I don't have really strong insight into where they get partners from. I don't know if you do, John, but.
It doesn't matter. I don't care. So we have a list, a long-standing list of partners that we have a core of partners that we deal with basically on a regular basis, regular cadence, and that grows. But it grows based on, as far as the experience that I've had, it grows based on the way that the market's fluctuating, the way that we perceive the market to be fluctuating. So as we perceive somebody becoming a more prevalent web presence, we will just reach out to them and find people inside. We have a slightly, a lot more history with connections. So we have a lot more connections than somebody else might. So if we want to reach out for API feedback, we know that some website used a similar API a long time ago, and so we can reach out and we probably still have contact information for them. But the way that it's actually organized is opaque to me. I don't understand.
Tom?
Yesterday, I don't know who mentioned that for the first time we have an origin trial that is not being interrupted.
We had that for WebAssembly threads a while back.
Okay, so it's not the first time? Okay, it's the first time that I hear about that. My understanding was origin trials by definition stop and then start again in launched form, hopefully, or shipped form. When talking to partners, and yeah, I've done that in my role in GTech, it's not something very compelling to tell a partner. So we give you this great feature, but actually we take it away from you again, and then we're not sure if it's going to come back. So if we have an origin trial that we're pretty confident will just evolve but not break, can we change the origin trial rules and say, look, we want to be more permissive? I know that's kind of predicting the future, and Alex is turning around.
So we have had a lot of conversations with the origin trial people about this exact topic. We did a non-breaking change for the badging the icon badging API, the WebAssembly threads API. I think we're currently considering it for wake lock, maybe. Yeah. So it's not like an exceptionally hard exception to make. And I would certainly say that if anybody here works with partners and you find a partner who really wants to adopt an API, but the 1 week of breakage is a deal breaker, like come talk to us and there's a decent chance that we can work it out. I think the Origin Trials people's perspective is also understandable. They really care about not having this thing be baked into the platform and guaranteeing the 1 week of breakage. The specific example that I was told about was WebXR, where they actually ended up not being able to make some of the breaking changes that they wanted because, oh, partners adopted this and now we can't actually make these changes. And so this is a way to try to prevent that.
On the topic of origin trials, so has that mechanism been used or successfully to get this long tail feedback that we were wanting to have? So are those guys interested in investing in exploring an API in development, knowing that it will go away? Any XR space, maybe there are been some smaller shops that have been experimenting, but
Maybe Chris can speak to the XR experience.
So with WebXR, we haven't really gotten locked in via partners. The challenges we've had has been around making continuous changes based on the standard during the origin trial state particularly. We did have a lot of trouble with WebVR because a lot of partners started baking it in, even though we didn't consistently have it turned on. And then when we let the origin trial for WebVR elapse, it was really problematic, to put it mildly.
To the question about getting the kind of long tail input as well, I think I have a standing AI in my backlog of things to do after TPAC to go and run down some of the M77 origin trials that we launched and specifically look at the different origins that adopted which APIs. A joining AI to that is trying to figure out how we can share that information with Microsoft and Intel to make sure that we can explain who's using what.
Yeah, we did run origin trial for sensors, generic sensor API, and we got some feedback, but we noticed very little long tail people. So you need to not kind of nudge people, hey, here is, please, could you make use of this trial? So I don't know if origin trial is very well advertised or known among the web developer community. If you go to Stack Overflow, do you actually get any hits for origin trial?
Yeah, I think for the most part, developers, up until now, we have not talked about origin trials very publicly. We're starting to switch that now. So with the Chrome beta blog posts, we are announcing that things are available as origin trials. And we're looking at other ways that we can start to get these getting more visibility, because it's true. Like, how do you know about this unless you go to the origin trials webpage and look at all the stuff that's available? It's not there.
Yeah, the beta release post that's going to come out next week will be the second one to actually feature origin trials. One thing I would be curious to know is, are partners not getting that these are experiments, or are they thinking if we just blunder ahead, we're so big Google will just have to go along with us?
So there is a design choice in the specific form of the origin trial system to prevent any party from being so large that they can bowl over the team. That's largely.
Do they think they can do it anyway?
So the advertised limits of the origin trial system for Chrome, I mean, other browser vendors could run other systems for their browsers, but Chrome's origin trial system has a per day page load fraction cap. And we have had conversations with extraordinarily large sites who would like to use things as origin trials to where we have informed them about these limits, and they have said, oh, how can we make this work? And so we've come up with some ways to be more elastic about this, where they'll try it for a day and promise to take it back, and we'll watch very closely to make sure they'll tell us, we're going to turn this on to like 100% for one day, so amortized over a week, it's still going to be below your threshold. Is that okay? And those are places where because everyone has the fear of being turned off, the system works as intended. And so it's really designed to reduce the risk. And as maybe a dirty secret, for the first year or two of origin trials, we actually didn't have automated enforcement. So all of this is down to the threat of doing this. There's more automated enforcement now, but having a beware of dog sign out front actually can change whose windows get broken, I think is the way to think about it.
From personal experience, I've never once had a partner where we told them about the 1 week of breakage and their attitude was, well, we're going to go ahead, and by the time we get to that 1 week, you won't be able to stop us. That has never once happened. At least in my partners.
If there's any aspect of this that is not, that they're not understanding, please set up a one-on-one, shoot an email, whatever. I'll work on it.
So, I mean, I know that for Wakelock, we've been requested to not have a breakage. So, I mean, it sounds like the messaging here is that no, we're going to tell our partner on that they are going to have a breakage. And just to the beta blog post, WebUSB, the origin trial, a couple of years ago was announced in the beta blog post. I thought that was what we've been doing for a while.
So there
have been over the years exceptions. What changed starting in 77 is, and those were, we had a policy of not doing it for reasons I can't now remember off the top of my head. Jason Chase could tell you could give you a whole spiel. But what changed in 77 was that we decided to deliberately start communicating about origin trials. And so now there is, the beta release post now has a specific section devoted to them that explains what they are, that has links to sign up and which trials are available, et cetera.
Super quick question for the folks in here. So I do the new in Chrome video and blog post. I do not include origin trial stuff because the view I have of new in Chrome is for stable. This is things that developers can use today, full featured, like have fun, run with it. Should we include, or should I start including origin trials in that? And if so, will there be issues if people sort of say, oh, well, this is origin trial. This is not really full featured yet.
Yeah, I think to answer your question before I go back to what I was going to say,
sorry,
that is the most important part. Is like we had this in past history where we didn't delineate what was bleeding edge, and this is before we did origin trials, so it was kind of like, hey, go use this feature, it's awesome. Oh yeah, it's under a flag, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. Yeah. And that communication wasn't great. As long as we're clearly saying, hey, this is an origin trial, this is when you should sign up for it. And that segues into what I was going to say, which is it's also important to remember origin trials are for getting really broad deployment feedback on using a feature. You can develop stuff without an origin trial. Like you just go flip the flag on and you're good.
Dev trials.
And in fact, a lot of the long tail partners that I've worked with in the past, they're usually going to do that anyways, because they're not actually trying to hit their users yet. They're trying to build an experience. And since origin trials tend to be fairly quick, it can take them longer than that to develop something sometimes. That's one of the reasons why it's great for large partners, better for large partners.
So yeah, like as examples, like the feedback we've gotten on like the shape detection and the WebUSB origin trial, we got some feedback. We didn't get much feedback. This generic sensor origin trial was worse. We got basically no feedback. You need to, when designing an origin trial, you need to think about who's going to be using the API. And when you're talking about an API that allows you to do something you've never been able to do before, that's when providing it behind a flag, doing the partner outreach, getting people to build things just to show them that it's possible is much more useful than shouting that it's available in origin trial, because maybe somebody will listen, maybe somebody won't.
I like the conversation on origin trial. I'm tempted to switch paces just because we've been talking about it for about a third of the time that we have. Joe, did you have one last point you wanted to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I found what the reasoning was for not publicizing them until now, and I think it's probably worth mentioning in case somebody gets gets a, you know, here's even a hint that somebody thinks it's other than this. And Jason Chase wrote this to me in an email a couple of years ago. When origin trials were new way back in 2016, there was a lot of concern about how the program would be received, especially not wanting origin trials to be seen as a way to bypass the standards process and let Chrome ship private APIs for Google. As I recall, that's Jason speaking, the thinking was that explicitly listing all the trials in the blog post might contribute to that perspective. Instead, the idea was to focus on the features themselves and let individual feature blog posts mention the trial as a way to try the feature. We started adding them. We started covering them because we are less afraid that people are going to think that. But if you hear that from any quarter, Pete and I would, and probably Jason Chase too, would like to hear that.
Definitely acknowledged.
As a little bit of background for all of this, with my API owner hat on very quickly, and helped design origin trials. This is all about trust, right? The whole system is designed to help us surface the level of trust that we can or should have in both a new feature and in the teams. And so when the API owners, what they're worried about, what I'm worried about, for instance, with an origin trial coming through and asking for a renewal or a small change without any breakage is, are you suppressing or not actively listening to the feedback that would cause you to change your API in a dramatic way in order to get a continuation with a small change instead? Because the goal here is to allow you to fail fast, not to allow you to proceed with minor changes. And so the structure of the origin trial system is designed to cap it. And in fact, you know, some of our experiences have caused us to now start to set some very hard limits on how long you'll be able to actually run an origin trial. So we didn't know what we were doing, right? We're learning as we go. And so the system is evolving in response to stimulus. I don't know if that's the right way to evolve it, but that's what we're doing. But it's about managing those risks. And I think you would have a better case for a small extension or a non-breaking, you know, non-1 week breakage if you were able to show that you had done everything in good faith. So it really is very much like arguing a case in court. It's not about a technical, you check this one box and the compiler agreed.
So one of the things that I really wanted to make sure we got a chance to talk about was also how to collect early feedback about what developers are interested in adding to the Chrome and Chromium and the browsers across the long tail and across all developers. And I wanted to specifically ask Microsoft, because I think you've been way ahead of us in this front. I know that in the past you've had things around user voice, I think it was called. And I know that Aaron Gustafson has his like the web that we want. Any like lessons to share? Should we try and start something like that again? Did it not succeed? Yeah.
So the web that we want relaunched or has launched last week or 2 weeks ago. And it was built in conjunction with Mozilla and user feedback. I can't remember exactly all the partnerships. I think somebody from Google was involved. Yeah, Chris. Okay, yeah, Chris. Good. Thank God. I was like, oh crap. Did we forget? And I do think that from when we were building Edge HTML, the feedback that we got through our DevRel and the user voice was very, very powerful because people felt like they were empowered. And the biggest takeaway that we got from that was that we imperatively have to close the loop with all these people who give us feedback. And we are sometimes very bad at that. But when we do close the loop and we say, hey, thank you for the feedback, we have actually done something, and it's not just a canned text tweet or whatever response, then that person usually spreads the word and we get more feedback and they are likely to come back again. I think one of the challenges that we took from Google, from Chrome, was vendor prefixing, which I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but vendor prefixing, when Microsoft started doing it with IE5 or 6, meant this is experimental. It has the initials MS in front of it, so like MS Flexbox or MS API or whatever. It means it's a temporary API that you can try, give us feedback, and see how you like. WebKit's implementation of mobile became ubiquitous and was no longer able to be removed. So WebKit prefixing became part of the web. And I think that's why there was fear of origin trials bypassing standards again, because WebKit prefixing bypasses standards. And so we learned from that and said, we have to do this in a way that is feedback driven and user driven. And that has helped. I mean, we'll see how it goes with this new launch of the web we want and see how we get feedback from that.
Yeah, so, but to your original question about also user voice and stuff like that, one of my like sibling people, I've heard him mention that he was actually working with Google on trying to figure out what our like shared equivalent of user voice should be. So if that's something you are interested in, I could probably put you in touch with him and he could tell you who at Google he's working with. Yeah, Kyle. Oh, cool. Perfect. Yeah. Kyle Flug on our team is doing it. And yeah, he's mentioned it a few times.
I guess I would like to ask if there was any reason why you switched from user voice to like the web that we want. Was there something like that didn't work well with the user
I think
voice?
user voice is tied to Windows, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Like it's tied to
That makes
Windows
perfect
release
sense.
cycles,
Cool.
Windows upload. Yeah. Yeah.
Super excited about the web that we want.
But yeah, it's
Awesome.
also like very associated with like Windows OS and OS development through Windows and all that.
Footnote to this: some of you might be aware that MDN released they opened for people to take a developer needs survey back in July, and I'm looking at an email. They're still compiling the results, but it looks like the final public report is not supposed to be released until October 30th. I have not heard anything about what's in that report, but I'm hoping I can get some maybe hear some things from some MDN people next week, but no promises. They might be wanting to keep it to themselves.
Yeah, we specifically added a question to that forum many months ago when they were putting it together about API requests and changes that developers need. Cool. So we still have 7 whole minutes. Any other? Yeah, Alex, go.
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our friends at Microsoft. Jacob Rossi is one of the people that we stole the idea from Origin Trials from when he was working on the Edge team. So I think it was a discussion at a blink on. So, like better together.
Jacob and
I work literally next to each other.
I have one question about long tail partner feedback from folks here, and that is, at what point does feedback coming in from the community, what's the best way that you want it? Is that going and looking at people posting tweets? Is that people sending you emails? Is that people posting questions on Stack Overflow? How do you want the feedback as we go through implementation? Because that's one thing we've struggled with on DevRel is how to get good feedback for you and direct that in a useful way.
Especially at the scale of APIs that we're working on.
Yeah.
I can give one concrete thing that I really love is what we've just started doing inside of Microsoft, which is we have a team who is gathering the feedback into a very, very digestible newsletter that we get Fridays. So it's just, here's everything we saw on Twitter, and they have their own whatever regex for finding those things. And here's everything we saw on any other help websites or via Feedback Hub or via Windows feedback or bugs. And they just summarize it very quickly so they aggregate. And I find it very consumable and very easy to understand. I still worry that large companies have a larger voice and we're not giving equal weight to my mom, but it's a really good first step, I feel like, in our department. But other people have other opinions, probably, right?
Apparently not.
Apparently not. I'm always right.
Hey, Riley to the rescue.
I would absolutely love to see a social media roll up like on Chrome stuff. I think that there's there's a conversation happening around the world today about what a browser should be and what like lots of this stuff. And I think that this doesn't get surfaced to those of us who are lucky enough not to be addicted to Twitter. And so, spreading the sort of the knowledge of what's going on in that in the general web developer community to everybody would be excellent. Weekly newsletter. It sounds really great.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, if we end up going down the weekly newsletter route, how do we go about reaching out to partners which we want like more detailed feedback? So you might get some feedback that this does not work, the solution doesn't work for me, but like, do we have a way of like having a more closer connection with some partners to get richer feedback?
Yeah, I think scaling partner communication on feedback of all of these APIs, especially, you know, with the level of feedback where we want to ideally like 2 to 4 partners to give active feedback on this has been a real challenge. Like it is shocking the amount of emails that you can send out to partners and get no response on. Let's put it that way. A lot of times, again, it helps when you have kind of personal relationships with some of these partners. They're much more likely to respond. Of course, monthly syncs are also incredibly valuable, but you can only have so many of those effectively. And I think one of the other big challenges has been we're building so many different APIs, and in order to cover all of them with 2 to 4 partners, since there isn't that much overlap from API to partner, you end up with a kind of a combinatorial set of partners and APIs and requests and feedback. And so I think I've shared with a bunch of people in this room the like getting our Fugu partners in order document where I try to lay out some of these things. I'll send that out to the wider Fugu team today. But definitely if you have thoughts on how to do this, one of the ideas that I'm exploring with BD is doing like a per release newsletter kind of thing where we could list out some of these APIs, and this would be like chunking the different APIs together. But the feedback that I'm hearing from BD is that it's very unlikely that partners are actually going to be responsive to that kind of communication. So it's a real struggle. Is what I'm saying.
I have a feeling like if partners are facing issues, they would be probably more proactive in actually communicating problems. I mean, if everything is going okay, they might not have as much interest in like telling you that things are going great. But if things are not great, they would want to actively reach out and tell you. And I think what I'm talking to is if there are problems, is there a way we can actually have an established communication channel with those partners who are like, we're not satisfied with this, so we're not moving to the web. So being able to talk to them and understand what they're not satisfied with.
Yeah. The biggest channel that we have for that right now is definitely just the monthly syncs of actually getting that feedback. The other challenge is that most of these partners have been living without these APIs for their entire existence. And so even when they are excited about it, it's not really like something has broken or like the status quo has actually changed for them. So it's very easy for them just to business as usual.
I know I've chatted with friends at other companies who have had a really hard time convincing their coworkers that yes, you can file bugs against Chrome and we will fix things. Don't work around it. No, really, you can actually tell them they're nice. They will fix your problem for you.
Do we need like an advertisement campaign? We're here to help.
Tying into that, like I subscribe to Web USB and Web Bluetooth on Stack Overflow. And that is probably a more approachable place for people to get answers to questions and figure out what people are looking for than, our bug tracker or any sort of communication channel we try and create. I don't know how much of how much time DevRel spends on Stack Overflow, but like that seems to be a place where we can meet developers where they are.
So we certainly do have a bunch of folks who spend some time there. You've seen the sum total of DevRel we have on Fugu. So spending a lot of time there is kind of hard for us. I'm going to throw the question back out at you. In the early days of API development, like origin trial and sort of that initial sort of, we're not at ship yet, are you willing to spend time on Stack Overflow to help make sure that we've got the right people getting answers and that kind of stuff? Is that something that you're willing to do? Because I think that might be a good way. Like we can step up certainly, but you're much more the experts on some of these.
As long as I get credit in perf.
You should.
Managers, will they get credit on perf?
Yes. Yeah. I do also actually want to say that of all the different APIs that we've done, I've been incredibly impressed with Riley's engagement on specifically those 2 APIs and his ability to like connect. I think this is a very active AI that I would love to pick up with all of the managers and TLs is how can we get more involved with the Stack Overflow process?
I would answer your question with like a yes. And specifically in the beginning, when we said what we were excited about, there were multiple people, me included, who said we're excited about getting other developers excited about the things we're doing. So I'd say in general, that's a common thing.
Thank you.
Beyond yes, I want to add kind of a flavor. You said, early in the API design process. Origin trials are late in the API design process. It is the final, like, shake the tree. Does it, last call. We're about to ship this.
I just wanted to back up what Pete said about encouraging you to go on to Stack Overflow. I go through periods where I go out there and try to look for stuff, but frequently I have to look up the answer, or I have to shoot one of you guys an email. You guys actually built the thing, which means you're going to do it in about a third. You're going to answer the question in about a third or a quarter of the time that it's going to take. Even really smart engineers in DevRel may or may not have to look it up.
Go to that. It might be a good idea to have like a place where if we see something, maybe they didn't put the web Bluetooth tag on it, but they're using it, and one of us sees it. It should be a good idea to like link that out. Like, hey, guys, there's this open question. There's a developer trying to solve a problem. Can we help them? And have like a channel for that or something. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Just a thought.
I actually started at Microsoft in the support. I was a support engineer, and then I was a tester. But I always really enjoyed the support engineer aspects to my job. And not for nothing, but devs are. I don't want to paint a picture of developers, but developers are really bad at talking to customers who use their API incorrectly. Generally speaking, devs can be less than polite. And so honestly, this is kind of a problem. Like I joke about it, but at Microsoft, we try to be really careful about before you're allowed to respond to things. First of all, you can't promise we're going to fix it because we've actually been sued when we've told companies we're going to fix a bug that we were not able to fix, and they had done business deals based on the idea that bug was going to get fixed. So you have to be really careful about stuff like that. So I think it's important that we engage in something like Stack Overflow, but maybe not everybody. And the other thing that I was going to say is I think setting realistic expectations to our users will encourage them to give us better feedback. And so like there's a bug right now in Chrome and Edge in Chromium, where if you go to the Yahoo news feed and you scroll down quickly, all the ads jump to the left. And this has been happening for about a month or so. And we got it. It was logged against us. And the next day, the guy's like, why hasn't it been fixed yet? I mean, literally the next day, it's like, I reported this yesterday. Why haven't you fixed this? I love Yahoo and I can't see the images. I'm like, oh God. So it just reminded me that if I had said to him, we might be able to fix it in 79, that would have changed his entire attitude. And he wouldn't have asked me the next day, why are you failing? And so there's little things like that that help us engage with the community and encourage better feedback from them just by being really personal and letting them know that we care about their feedback, I guess. And being honest about when we can fix stuff. Like we're probably not going to fix that. Right? I don't know.
All right. I think we're about 4 minutes past time, which is no big deal. But any final thought from anybody who had something that they wanted to say but didn't get a chance?
I love that we're all working together on this stuff.
Yay! All right, and without further ado, I'll pass it off to Josh for closing remarks.
Oh, not quite yet.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Let's take 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and then we'll stretch it out. So we'll kick off the closing ceremonies, which will have fireworks and parades and dancers and everything at 3:45. That sounds particularly exciting. I did not bring my fire whip with me. Remind me next time.